Hey guys! Tonight we journey to a windswept, rain-drenched island where the wind smells faintly of sea salt, sheep, and, curiously, something a bit more dairy-forward. You're here to help the monks of a remote Irish monastery carry out their humble daily tasks, and tonight that task involves lighting your way with a candle made not of beeswax nor paraffin, but of fat. Cheese fat, to be precise. You probably won't survive this century, let's be honest. You can barely handle lactose. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And tell me, where are you listening from and what time is it there? I always love seeing how far and wide this little channel travels. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You trudge up a narrow, mud-slick path toward a low stone wall. Mist curls over the hills like it's been paid to do so, and a bell tolls somewhere ahead. Not a loud, majestic cathedral clang, but a rusty, apologetic gong, like the bell itself knows it's been left out in the rain. The monastery appears slowly through the fog, squat, gray, and built like a sheep with arthritis, hunched and stubborn against the elements. Moss coats every surface. You half expect the stones to sneeze. A monk in a hood 3 sizes too big for his head waves you in. No words. You're not surprised. This is, after all, a silent order, or at least a quiet one. Words are saved for prayers, chants, and the occasional necessary complaint about Brother Aidan stealing extra honey. Inside it's a little warmer. Not much, just enough to make the damp feel cozy rather than life-threatening. Your shoes, hand-stitched, probably by someone half-blind, squish a bit. You try not to think about it. This is your first evening. You've arrived just before the candle lighting hour. A good time. You're not yet on any chore roster, and you haven't made a single mistake that would put you in charge of cleaning the privy. Yet. You're led down a corridor that smells like damp wool, old ash, and the unyielding presence of livestock. A dim room awaits. It's not the scriptorium. Not yet. This is more of a workroom. Clay bowls are stacked in the corner, a stone basin, a shelf of waxy stumps that vaguely resemble the world's least appetizing snack. And candles. Lumpy, pale, squat little things. They're ugly in a way that makes you respect them. Functional. Honest. One sits burning near a small stone altar, its flame flickering and a faint smell lingering in the air that you can't quite place. Something savory? You lean in. Cheese? Before you can make a mental note about whether this is divine inspiration or dairy hallucination, a monk silently gestures you over and points to the pile of stubs. You get the message. Time to help. Your hands meet wax that's not quite waxy. It's softer. Oily. It leaves a residue that clings like butter, but with none of the appeal. You don't gag, yet, but you do glance around the room, looking for confirmation that, yes, this is completely normal. It is. Another monk enters. He's older, with eyebrows so bushy you suspect they might harbor birds. He picks up a candle, sniffs it, nods in satisfaction, and places it carefully in a little niche on the wall. One of dozens. This is the hour of light. In most places, they would use beeswax, luxurious, golden, lightly sweet-smelling. In wealthier abbeys, perhaps imported wax from the continent, but not here. not in this rain-battered sanctuary at the edge of the world. Here, your light comes from the leftovers of your lunch. The creamy top of the milk, the crusty edge of the butter slab, the fatty smear left in the bottom of the curd pot. It turns out, cheese fat, what some monks call bog butter's cousin, burns decently. Not beautifully, but decently. Long enough for you to find your way through an icy corridor without tripping over a novice asleep at his prayers. The wind howls outside, and your candle flickers, sending strange shadows up the limestone walls. You shift slightly on the stone bench. Your stomach growls. No surprise. You've had nothing but barley broth and half an oatcake since morning. You reach for a stub to adjust it and realize your hands now smell faintly of aged cheddar and singed wool. Welcome to the monastery. Historians still argue whether Irish monks used cheese fat out of poverty or practicality. Was it simply a matter of survival, or a clever recycling of surplus? Was it widespread, or limited to certain rural communities? You won't get an answer tonight, and honestly, neither will they. But what's clear is this. Someone centuries ago decided that leftover dairy was too valuable to waste. Not just on eating, but on seeing, on praying, on bringing warmth into the darkness. And now so do you. The bell rings again, softer this time. A signal. It's almost time for Vespers. Soon you'll walk into the chapel, candle in hand, the scent of warmed fat curling into your nostrils like a ghost of someone's very odd dinner. You'll kneel beside the others, murmuring prayers into the flickering dark, the cheese light bouncing off the stone. You try not to giggle. You wake the next morning to a sound that isn't quite a bell, nor quite a knock, more like a wooden clack, echoing down the corridor, like someone politely announcing that it's time to be miserable again. You sit up on your straw mattress, knees cracking, spine stiff. Welcome to monastic living, where back support is a heresy, and blankets are made of 80% wool and 20% regret. The candle you lit the night before has burned down to a stub. It left behind a waxy puddle on the stone shelf, hardened overnight into something that looks suspiciously like cheese that's gone to confession and come back spiritually cleansed. The air in your cell smells faintly of smoke and last night's dinner, which, now that you think of it, was suspiciously similar in scent to the candle. You try not to think too hard about that. You shuffle into your robe, rough and homespun, and make your way out into the cloister. The morning mist coils between the arches like it's searching for gossip. The stone beneath your bare feet is cold enough to make you gasp, a holy kind of gasp, the kind that might double as a prayer, if you say it just right. The cloister garden is damp and quiet. A few other monks drift silently by, like ghosts wearing sackcloth. One is already pulling weeds with terrifying enthusiasm. Another carries a bucket of what you hope is milk, but could just as easily be fish heads. You make a mental note to avoid soup today. A bell finally rings, properly this time. Clear, slow, tolling once for each hour since midnight. It's early, too early for anything except silence and shared suffering. Breakfast is a solemn affair. A chunk of barley bread, a ladle of weak broth, and if you're lucky, a sliver of something that once dreamed of being cheese. The cheese here is not the kind that comes in wheels and sings of alpine meadows. No, this cheese is thick, crumbly, aggressively local. More a suggestion of dairy than a celebration of it. As you chew in meditative silence, you look around the refectory. The windows are small and high up, letting in just enough light to remind you that yes, it's still raining. Every few tables down, a candle burns. Not the long, graceful tapers of a cathedral, but stout, stubby cylinders of pale yellow fat. They flicker stubbornly, throwing wobbly shadows onto the rough wood and stone. The candle nearest you sputters a little. You watch as a droplet of melted fat wobbles down the side and lands in someone's porridge. He eats it anyway. He doesn't even blink. You begin to understand what kind of place this is. After breakfast, chores are assigned. Not out loud. Assignments here are delivered with nods, glances, or the occasional deeply meaningful eyebrow raise. You're motioned toward the dairy house, which is, you are quickly learning, shorthand for prepare to smell terrible for the rest of the day. The path to the dairy is narrow and lined with herbs, mint, thyme, maybe a desperate attempt at rosemary. The monks say it's for the bees, though bees are rare this time of year. You suspect it's also for spiritual camouflage, the scent of holy herbs doing their best to mask the reek of curdled milk and damp wool. Inside the dairy, it's warmer than the rest of the monastery, thanks to the thick walls and the soft hum of fermentation. Clay pots line the shelves, their contents in various stages of becoming food or something far more philosophical. You're handed a pail and directed toward the cow enclosure. Now, these cows are not the sleek, photo-shoot-ready Holsteins of modern farms. They are small, scrappy, with long, shaggy coats, and the permanent expression of animals who know the rain will never stop. You greet one. She stares. You try to pet her. She declines. Still, she allows you to milk her. The process is surprisingly rhythmic, and you fall into a sleepy sort of trance. Pull, squeeze, squirt, repeat. The milk hits the bucket with a soft splatter, warm and slightly frothy. You are now contributing to the very substance that will later be turned into prayer fuel. Historians still argue whether Irish monks intentionally diverted part of their milk production for lighting, or if it began as a happy accident. Cheese gone too soft, butter gone too far, and a monk with fewer taste buds than sense deciding to set it on fire. But you see now that everything here serves multiple purposes. Milk becomes food, of course, but also fat. Fat becomes light. Light becomes time. Vespers, Compline, Matins, measured not by clocks, but by the flicker of flame. The monk beside you nods once, approvingly, and you realize you've filled your pail. He takes it without a word, disappearing into the back of the dairy, where the magic, or the mess, happens. You're left alone for a moment. You breathe in the strange, sour-sweet air. You feel the chill of the morning lifting just slightly from your shoulders. You glance down at your hand, still smelling faintly of cow and effort. And then you see it, a stub of candle left on a little shelf in the corner of the dairy. Burned low, melted strangely, a small pool of fat still congealing in the base. It smells like the cow you just milked, and slightly, faintly, like hope. By mid-morning, the fog has retreated just enough for the hills beyond the cloister walls to look slightly less like myth and more like landscape. The air smells of damp soil, ash, and something unmistakably sour-sweet. Cheese fat, of course. It's in everything here. On the robes, in your hair, likely under your fingernails. The cows have done their part, and now so must you. You're assigned to the cream rations. Inside the dairy's side chamber, cool and dim, long wooden troughs hold milk in various stages of separation. It's been left to sit overnight, and now cream has risen to the top in thin, velvety sheets that must be skimmed with slow, deliberate hands. A monk gestures for you to begin. You take a shallow ladle, shaped like a seashell, and begin to draw the cream off, careful not to dip too deep into the milk below. The texture is silky, like liquid velvet, rich, luxurious, almost indecent in its decadence compared to your breakfast. But none of this cream is for eating, not directly anyway. This is candle cream. Each pail you fill will be churned later, not into butter for bread, but into a crude, grainy fat, the kind of thing modern chefs would scream about, but which lights a chapel just fine. The monk overseeing the operation carries a small ledger. It's a rough thing, made of bark parchment and stained with decades of mysterious splatters. He dips a quill into something that looks more like soot than ink and carefully notes your portion. Every ladleful you skim is watched with the kind of intensity normally reserved for criminal trials or particularly competitive chess matches. Cream here is currency. Not in the traditional jingle in your pouch sense, but in this monastery, every drop matters. Cream turned to fat turns to light, and that light dictates prayer hours, meal times, and whether Brother Ciaran falls down the chapel stairs again. You ask, silently, with a raised brow and a pantomime spoon-to-mouth motion, why not just eat it? The monk looks at you, then at the cream, then gives a weary shake of the head, as if to say, you'll understand eventually. He's not wrong, because here's the thing. This isn't just a monastery, it's a cheese economy in miniature. Historians still argue whether Irish monasteries operated as self-contained feudal systems or communal experiments in survival. But here, in this stone-walled world, you can feel the rhythms of ration and routine like a second heartbeat. The cream gets portioned out, some for eating, some for selling to villagers, some for medicinal poultices that smell suspiciously edible, and then this sacred share for the candles. These candles light the scriptorium, where ancient texts are copied letter by painstaking letter. They light the kitchens, the refectory, the cold stone corridors. And most critically, they light the chapel, where hours of prayer are read not by sunlight, but by the flickering, faintly nutty glow of cheese-fueled flame. You move to the next tub. This milk came from a different cow, and the cream has a slightly yellowish hue, richer, almost golden. You skim slowly, gently, like lifting dreams off a still lake. The monk watching you gives an approving nod, then pinches off a dollop with his finger and tastes it. You freeze. Is that allowed? He shrugs. Maybe not, but he's been here 30 years, and there are perks. He offers you a dab. You try it. It tastes like everything good you've ever had diluted through 10 miles of damp wool and vague spirituality. Still, it's cream, and for a second you forget how hungry you are and how tired. Then he shows you the abbot's log. It's a wax tablet, literally wax, carved and scratched with a stylus, The tally marks are faint but meaningful. They show how many portions are allotted per week, per monk, per season. And next to them, tiny marks indicating candle quality cream. Not all cream makes the cut. Apparently, cheese fat candles are a picky breed. Too sour and they sputter. Too thin and they melt too quickly. Too old and the smell is enough to call down divine wrath, or at least a thorough cleaning order. So only the best surplus is set aside, chilled in stone crocks and marked with a little T etched into the lid. Monks with steady hands and decent noses are responsible for choosing the batches. You are not yet trusted. But maybe, someday. You return to your work, skimming cream like a slow-motion alchemist. Outside, the wind howls again. A sheep bleats. Rain begins anew, pattering the slate roof above your head. You're inside, though, and warm, and you're doing work that somehow, against all odds, feels important. A candle sputters beside the door, its fat base gently slumping in the warmth of the room. It smells faintly of old cheddar and salvation. You smile, just a little. You're back in the Abbey's wide stone kitchen by early afternoon, when the wind has softened into something like a sigh and the clouds drift low enough to touch. The cream you helped collect earlier is being carried in by a team of younger novices, each wobbling under the weight of a heavy wooden pail. You follow them, not out of obligation, but curiosity. After all, you're starting to realize, in this place, milk has destinies. The abbot himself, a wiry man with a voice like dry parchment, appears from behind a curtain of hanging herbs. He gestures to you with one finger, "Come closer," and you do, partly out of obedience, partly out of fear that not doing so will result in a month's worth of fish gut stirring. He leads you to the fat-melting hearth, the holy of holies in the monastery's candle-making process. The heat here is intense. Someone has clearly been tending the fire for hours already. Iron pots, blackened and ancient, sit above glowing embers. One is bubbling gently, exuding a rich, oily smell that hovers somewhere between soup and candle shop. A monk with worryingly singed robes hovers nearby, stirring with a stick that looks suspiciously like it used to be part of a bishop's crozier. He catches your eye, smiles faintly, and reveals two perfectly bare eyebrows. They've been singed off. You wonder briefly if that's why he got assigned to this job. You're handed a ladle and invited to stir. You do, cautiously. The fat inside the pot is thick and golden, just beginning to clarify. It's not pure butter, not quite ghee either. It's something in between. A thick, cheesy reduction strained through cloth and left to melt down into a usable base. Any remaining solids will be skimmed off. What's left behind is the stuff of ancient luminescence. You're sweating in moments. The heat from the hearth is relentless and the air feels greasy. The abbot nods at your technique, then grunts something that might be approval or might be indigestion. It's hard to tell with monks. Next to the hearth, rows of clay molds are already laid out. Each is shaped like a squat cylinder, slightly tapering at the top. The bottoms are lined with coarse linen wicks, twisted by hand and soaked in brine to keep the flame even. One of the monks picks up a mold, tilts it, and sniffs. You raise an eyebrow. He nods sagely. "Cheese remembers," he mouths. It's a saying here, apparently, meaning if the milk came from an overexcited spring cow, or if the cream had even a hint of wild garlic from a field, the candle will carry that memory. Some monks even claim that candles burn with different moods depending on the cow. Historians still argue whether that's folklore or the early medieval equivalent of office gossip. But you swear the one currently burning near the hearth smells vaguely like daisies and defiance. The fat is ready. Using a thick, scorched cloth, you help pour the melted cheese fat into the waiting molds. The process requires a steadier hand than you expected. Too fast, and the wick dislodges. Too slow, and the fat cools before the mold fills, leaving ugly gaps and a half-finished candle that burns like a guilty conscience. As you pour, the abbot murmurs something in Latin, perhaps a blessing, perhaps a reminder not to spill again like Brother Padraig did last week, resulting in an entire floor of slippery, luminous tiles and one very bruised scribe. The molds are covered with planks and left near the hearth to cool slowly. Patience, the abbot says without speaking, is the final ingredient. That, and not dropping the entire tray onto the floor when the bell rings for none. You sit back, dizzy from the heat and overwhelmed by the smell. Half monastery kitchen, half haunted fondue party. Your robe is clinging to your back. Your hands shine with an oily sheen. You look like a walking smear of candle potential. But you feel oddly proud. These lumps of cooling fat will light the chapel, keep scribes from ruining their eyesight, and maybe, just maybe, help illuminate the margins of a sacred manuscript where some bored monk will someday doodle a cat playing the harp. You get up to leave, only to step directly into a slick patch of cooled fat on the flagstones. Your foot shoots forward. You wobble. The candle monk catches you by the elbow with surprising speed for someone who's clearly been melted half a dozen times. You both pause, eyes wide, then share a quick, silent laugh. The kind of laugh you can only get away with in a monastery if no one else is watching. He leans close, sniffs your sleeve, and nods. "Good batch," he mouths. You're not sure if he means the candles or the fall. Either way, it's a compliment. As you step back into the cool air outside, the smell of burning cheese fat clinging to you like a stubborn blessing, you feel light. Not the spiritual kind, though maybe that too. Just the kind of light that comes from knowing you helped make fire from curds. Evening is beginning to settle over the hills when the abbot tells the story. Not with words, of course. Not out loud. He sits with the younger novices in the refectory after supper, while the fire crackles and a single candle burns in the middle of the table, casting warped shadows across their tired faces. You just happen to be sweeping the floor nearby, conveniently within earshot, because eavesdropping is the holiest vice in a monastery. The abbot begins to gesture. Hands spread wide, nose wrinkled, eyebrows arched dramatically, what's left of them anyway. The novices lean in. You do too, still pretending to sweep, though it's unclear whether the floor is cleaner or simply being moved around. This is the tale of the rancid batch. It begins, as all good monastery tales do, with a novice who was too eager and a cellar that was too damp. Historians still argue whether this event actually happened or whether it's just one of those cautionary tales designed to keep overly enthusiastic apprentices in check. Either way, the story goes like this. Brother Mail had been tasked with fetching cheese fat from the cool cellar in preparation for a particularly dark week. Cloud cover had been heavy, the beeswax reserves were low, The cows had eaten something strange. The abbot was in a mood. So Brother Mayle, eager to impress, took it upon himself to use an old crock of leftover tallow, one that had been buried behind a row of root vegetables and forgotten during Lent. Now, cheese fat doesn't age like wine, nor does it, as it turns out, get better with distance. He brought it upstairs, melted it without checking the scent, and poured 24 candles from the foul, unrepentant goo. The first was lit at Vespers. Within minutes, the chapel filled with what witnesses later described as a fog of sins past. One monk said it smelled like old sandals boiled in regret. Another claimed it made his nose cry. No one lasted through the full hymn. Half the monastery had to relocate to the sheep barn until the smell cleared. Mayle was banned from the dairy for 6 months and reassigned to goose plucking, an equally noble but infinitely smellier task. The molds had to be buried behind the herb garden. The memory lives on. The abbot finishes the story by pointing at the candle currently burning on the table. He wiggles his nose theatrically and gives a firm thumbs up. This one is fresh. You exhale, amused, and keep sweeping. You think you might actually be smiling. One of the younger novices nudges you as you pass. He whispers, "They say Mayle's ghost still haunts the cellar, sniffing." You raise an eyebrow. He shrugs. Or maybe that's just Brother Elowen. Hard to tell. After prayers, you're assigned to candle maintenance. Specifically, you're to inspect the day's new batch. You return to the mold room, now cooler, the candles solid and set. You unlatch the wooden covers and lift each candle carefully from its mold. They're squat, matte, and slightly greasy to the touch. Not beautiful, but functional. A faint whiff of dairy hangs on the air. Pleasant, even. You trim the wicks with a bone-handled knife and line the candles on the shelf by size. A ritual so methodical it could count as penance or therapy, depending on the day. Each one has slight variations in color, some more golden, some almost white. The scent, too, shifts slightly. A trained nose, like the eyebrowless candle monks, could probably identify the cow by name. You wonder briefly if anyone's ever tried to name the candles. You decide against suggesting it. That feels like a slippery slope to idolatry or loneliness. Then comes the final test. One candle is chosen, randomly, and lit to ensure the batch burns properly. You strike flint to steel, no easy task with sweaty hands and a drafty window nearby. Finally, a spark catches. The wick hisses, and the flame flickers to life. At first, it's hesitant. Then it steadies, a small warm bloom of light. You watch. It burns clean, a soft, buttery glow. You lean in, inhale, and you have to admit, it smells kind of good. Faintly earthy, a little nutty, like someone tried to roast bread in a field full of sheep and then gave up halfway through. You imagine this light spreading across the chapel, falling on a scribe's page as he copies the Gospel of John for the 6th time this winter, illuminating the feet of a monk as he kneels in midnight prayer, dripping quietly onto cold stone as a storm lashes the abbey walls. This is more than lighting, it's presence, a kind of warmth in a world mostly gray. You snuff the test flame with a clay cone, watch the last curl of smoke rise, and place the candle gently into the approved basket. The others will follow tomorrow. You leave the room, hands still slightly greasy, the story of Brother Mail lingering in your mind like the faint scent of toasted failure. Outside, it's dark now. A few stars struggle through the clouds. From the chapel, a bell tolls softly. And somewhere, faint but familiar, the smell of cheese fat drifts on the wind. The next day begins with mist, of course. It always does. But it carries a certain clarity this morning. A breeze off the sea pushes the fog around like a lazy housekeeper, and for a brief, shining moment, you can see the tops of the hills. They're dotted with stones and sheep, and one particularly grumpy goat you've named Brother Fergus, despite strict policies against fraternizing with the livestock. You're summoned again to the candle hearth, but today you're not stirring. You're learning from the source, Brother Ailby, the eyebrowless one. He beckons you over with a flap of his sleeve. A pot of soft, chilled cheese tallow sits beside the fire, and next to it a strange assortment of tools, a wire loop, a hollowed horn, a rock with a hole through the middle. None of this fills you with confidence. He gestures for you to sit, then lights a candle, a fresh one from yesterday's batch. He holds it close to his face, inhales, and lets out what can only be described as a satisfied dairy sigh. Then he begins. This is fire from curds. Your first job is to understand the substance. Cheese fat isn't just melted butter. No, that's a mistake the green novices make. Butter melts easily, but burns dirty. Too many milk solids. Cheese tallow is strained, then strained again. What you're left with is something denser, more stable. It doesn't smoke unless you push it too hot. It doesn't flicker unless you let the wick go ragged. He presses a finger into the cooled fat. It leaves an imprint. Then he scoops some out and rolls it between his palms, forming a rough, pale ball. You don't ask why. He tosses it into the pot with a shrug, as if to say, art needs practice. You're shown the wick sticks next, splinters of ash wood, used to wrap and shape the wicks before setting them into molds. The wick is a sacred thing, he mouths, the soul of the candle. If it curls too much, the flame dances. Too stiff, and it gutters out. You watch as he gently lays a wick into a mold, like tucking a child into bed. Then he hands one to you. You try, hands still clumsy, and somehow knock the wick sideways. The tip flops over the rim. Ailby closes his eyes as if to mourn its tiny, unfinished life. He reshapes it wordlessly and moves on. Soon he shows you the melting. The pot is suspended above a low flame, not in direct contact, but hung on a swinging iron arm that lets you tilt it slightly. The goal is not to boil, never boil. That's when it separates. You stir with a flat-bladed paddle carved from bog oak. It's older than you, possibly older than the monastery. You ask in a whisper if this was always how candles were made. Ailby shrugs. Historians still argue whether the use of cheese fat for candles was an invention born of necessity or innovation. Maybe both. Some say it was used only in poorer abbeys. Others insist it was a delicacy of rural monasteries, burning the fat of their own herds, watching their own herds grazing by the light of their own cows. He points to the open door, where the breeze shifts and light spills in. Everything returns, he mouths. fat to light, smoke to prayer, ash to earth. Even the stubs of old candles get scraped and saved. No waste, ever. You glance at the floor near the hearth and see a bowl of stub ends, each a strange little relic, warped, half melted, some with wicks intact. These are remelted weekly. The old fat is reborn as new flame. You ask, what if the cheese was not perfect? His eyes widen. Ah, the question. He walks you to a separate shelf. There sit the rejects, the interesting candles. One is oddly purple-tinged. Another is lumpy, full of curdled pockets. These are for the barn, he signs. You nod. Of course. Even monks don't waste bad cheese candles. They simply reserve them for less sacred spaces, like the goat shed or the privy, or for Brother Eon when he insists he's fine copying manuscripts at midnight. Ilb lets you light one of the rejects. It sputters like it's telling secrets. The smell is not terrible, but it's certainly memorable, like smoked yogurt with ambition. He chuckles silently and opens a small wooden drawer. Inside are slips of parchment. They're labels. Each one contains the name of the cow, the week of the batch, and a note mild, burns sweet, or no again. You realize this is cheese candle quality control. Suddenly you are holding centuries of expertise in your greasy, trembling hands. That afternoon, as the last candle of the batch cools in its mold, you feel something change. The monastery isn't a place of silence and rules anymore. It's a place of rhythm, of cycles, of transformation. You step outside, candle tucked under your arm, and for a moment, just a moment, you swear the breeze smells like curdled sunlight. The chapel is quiet. Not silent, never truly silent, but filled with that particular hush that exists only in places made of stone and prayer. The wind hums against the old wooden shutters like it's trying to get in and confess something. You're kneeling in a side aisle, candle in hand. Tonight, you're in charge of lighting the vesper flames. This is a task normally reserved for monks with steady hands and cleaner robes, but Brother Coleman has taken a vow of silence and the hiccups, so you've been drafted. The candle you hold is warm from your palm, slightly dented on one side where you bumped it against a doorway. You tell yourself it's rustic. You walk slowly, barefoot on cold stone, past the rows of dark pews. Each step echoes a little too loudly, so you start stepping on the balls of your feet, like a particularly pious burglar. The sconces are evenly spaced along the wall, little iron claws set into limestone, each holding the remnants of last night's candle, some burned low, others untouched. You remove the stubs and slide your fresh candles into place, careful to twist the wicks upright. You strike the flint. It takes 3 tries. 4th try, success. The wick catches, the flame grows. It gives off the faint scent of warmth, not a particular smell, just warmth, as if light itself had a flavor. You get hints of butter, wool, and something like toasted oat, monastic s'mores, perhaps. You move down the aisle, lighting one by one. The chapel slowly fills with the golden glow of cheese-fat light, dancing gently on stone walls carved with saints and forgotten graffiti. Someone, long ago, scratched a sheep into the wall near the altar. You suspect it was a subtle protest. The flames are different from beeswax. They're softer, less polished. They flicker more readily, as if they're unsure about being awake at this hour. They seem humble. A light that knows it came from a cow. When all the candles are lit, you sit in the front pew. The benches are hard and smooth from centuries of use, polished by devotion and shifting rear ends. You try to imagine a service here 100 years ago. The chant would be the same, the robes mostly unchanged, and the light still this faint, creamy shimmer. The monks then might have knelt in the same cold spots, felt the same breeze under the door, squinted at the same uneven glow, and smelled the exact same candle that made you gag a little during practice. You glance up. The beams in the ceiling are darkened with centuries of soot, layers of prayers rising up as smoke. You wonder how much of it was cheese. The organ creaks slightly, though no one plays it tonight. Perhaps it's protesting the derriere, or perhaps it just misses being played. You notice now that the candles closest to the altar burn slightly differently, more evenly. Ilbez's work, no doubt. He has a sixth sense for wicks. The man could probably trim one with his mind. You're supposed to pray, so you do. Quietly, not with words, just presence. Sitting there, you start to think about how odd and brilliant it is that something once churned by hand, left to age in a damp room, and then melted in a soot-covered pot, is now the only source of light in a space meant to touch the divine. Historians still argue whether Irish monks preferred candlelight out of tradition, necessity, or sheer stubbornness. Some evidence suggests certain abbeys experimented with fish oil, others with peat lamps, but candles, even crude ones, dominated, perhaps because flame is a visible prayer, a moving, breathing proof that even the humblest of things, like cow fat, can become sacred. You reach into your robe and pull out a small stub from last week, a misfit candle with an uneven base. You like to carry one around now, not for light, just for company. It reminds you of something Ilbez signed the day before. Even the stub burns. You place it gently in a corner niche and light it. It flares slightly, as if surprised to be invited to the ceremony. You smile. "Welcome to the choir, little one." Across the chapel, you spot Brother Ian entering with his usual clatter, robe caught on something, shoes half on. He bows hurriedly and slides into place. A candle near him flickers violently, then steadies. Coincidence? Perhaps. But the scent that drifts across the nave makes you think of pickled cabbage. You try not to laugh. You fail. Just a little. The bell tolls once. Vespers begins. Chants rise, low and slow, winding around the columns like smoke. The candlelight shivers with the breath of sacred song. Your voice joins, quiet and unsure at first, but steadier with each note. The cheese-fat candles burn on. They do not judge. They simply flicker. And somewhere between the harmony of Old Latin and the dance of shadows, you realize something. You're not just lighting candles, you're keeping watch. For the living, for the memory of cows long gone, for light itself. And as your little stub candle joins the chorus of flames, flickering proudly despite its awkward shape, you whisper a small, grateful prayer. May we all burn weird, but bright. Somewhere between dawn and breakfast, you find yourself up to your elbows in a wooden churn. You didn't volunteer for this. You merely walked into the wrong room at the wrong time. And a novice with very strong opinions about butter passed you the handle and said, "It's your turn now," then vanished, as all seasoned monks seem to do when chores are being assigned. So here you are, shoulders sore, wrists screaming, churning cream that will never touch a slice of bread. You churn in a rhythm. Push, pull, pause, push, pull. The paddles thump and squelch in a sound that might be musical if you hadn't been doing it for the past 45 minutes. The cream is thick now, on its way to becoming butter, but not quite. The stage just before full separation. Brother Seamus, who has the energy of a man who's either profoundly caffeinated or deeply at peace, leans over the churn and nods. "This," he whispers, "is the moment it turns holy." You resist the urge to tell him it feels more like your arms are being excommunicated. Instead, you grin and keep churning. As you work, Seamus begins to hum. At first you think it's a random tune, some whimsical hum made up to pass the time. But then another monk across the room joins in, and then another. The low notes carry through the wooden beams and stone walls until it becomes a chant. Not formal, not scripted, but ancient, maybe. You recognize the melody. It's a hymn, one of the Brigid ones. Saint Brigid, patroness of dairy, light, poetry, and apparently cardio. They say she once turned her bathwater into beer, her bread into light, and her butter into a weapon against darkness. Or maybe that last one was symbolic. Historians still argue whether Brigid was ever a real person or a Christian repackaging of a much older Celtic goddess. But the monks here seem entirely sure. She blessed the cows, and she blessed the butter. And by association, she blessed the candles. You begin to hum along. Churning in time with the chant feels easier. Your breath matches the motion. The cream begins to separate. Little blobs of fat rising and gathering like sleepy islands in a pale sea. Brother Seamus dips a finger in and tastes. His eyes flutter dramatically. "Perfect," he says. You want to agree, but your biceps are too numb to be sure. Now comes the straining. The churn is tilted, and a cloth, coarse linen, washed in ash and rain, is laid over a shallow basin. The liquid pours through. The buttermilk flows off, leaving behind soft, yellowish clumps of fat. These will be gently pressed, then melted for candle use. As the last of it is strained, Seamus takes a moment to scoop a small chunk aside. He wraps it in a leaf of cabbage and tucks it under a nearby rock. You raise an eyebrow. "Midday snark," he says. "Butter is for candles, but a monk must live." You're not sure if he's breaking a rule or performing some strange rite. Maybe both. The fat is carried to the hearth, where it will join the others waiting to be rendered. But for now, your work is done. Your robe is flecked with cream, your arms ache. But you feel something strange, a kind of satisfaction. You helped turn cream into flame. Later, as you rest near the garden wall, Brother Seamus plops down beside you and offers a chunk of dry bread. You accept. It's hard enough to file a doorway, but you chew dutifully. "Brigid turned butter with a prayer," he says, "and they say her hands never tired." You look down at your trembling fingers. "Well," you say, "I must have missed the prayer part." He nods solemnly. "That's why you're sore." You glance at the sky, pale blue with just a sliver of cloud, For once, no rain. Nearby, a few bees hover around the wildflowers. They're more interested in the thyme than the monks. You ever use beeswax? You ask. Same shrugs. When the bees feel generous. Rare, though. Beeswax is for saints. Cheese fat is for the rest of us. You think about that. Saints burn clean. But the rest of us, we sputter. We smoke. We leave strange smells and melted puddles in our wake. And still, we shine. You sit in silence for a while longer, sharing the bench with a crumbly slice of cabbage-wrapped butter and the satisfaction of a job done poorly but enthusiastically. Then the bell rings for sext. You rise, a little stiff, and head toward the chapel. You'll be lighting the candles again tonight, and now you'll know exactly what went into them. A few hours of churning, 2 numb shoulders, a cabbage leaf, and a hymn to a saint who may or may not have ever existed, but whose butter still burns. You're standing in the narthex again, cold stone underfoot, a candle in your hand, still soft from the afternoon's pressing. You've been asked to light the Vespers flame, not just any candle this time. This one goes into the sanctuary, up by the altar. It's an honor, apparently. Or, as Brother Aelb signed this morning while fending off a goat with a ladle, "Don't drop it." The sanctuary is already dim. A few stubs burn low along the wall, casting sleepy amber light across the icon of St. Kieran, who stares down at you with a face like he's seen one too many bad hymnals. You pause at the altar rail, holding the candle with both hands like it's a relic. And, in a way, it is. This one's different. The tallow came from a particularly rich cream batch, milk from a cow they call Meyer the Gentle. You've never seen her act anything but irritated, but monks are optimistic that way. The scent is subtler this time. Less cheddar, more baked grass and woolen comfort. You were told this one had aged a little longer than usual, more solid. A golden cake, Aelb had whispered, with what could only be called reverence. You strike the flint, it sparks, and again. The wick catches, the flame blooms. It rises slowly, like it's testing the air, then steadies into a clean, soft glow that paints your knuckles in honey-colored light. The scent spreads immediately, a warm, earthy perfume that blends with the stone, the old incense still lingering in the mortar, and the faint mildew that no amount of prayer can quite keep at bay. This is not a candle you gag over. This one you almost admire. You slide it into the iron holder beside the altar and step back. The flame flickers once, then settles. It's perfect. You walk back to the pews, heart ticking a little faster than usual. Not pride, exactly, but something near it. After all, this is your candle, your batch, your stirring, your crooked wrist from 2 straight hours of churning. It smells slightly of your sweat, and more than slightly, of a particularly stubborn cow. The monks begin to file in for Vespers. One by one, they kneel. The chants begin. And you sit in the second row watching your candle burn beside the altar like it's been there for centuries. A few moments in, Brother Eon leans toward you and murmurs, "This one doesn't stink." You nod gravely, like that was your plan all along. He adds, "It smells like bread? Maybe hay? But better." You whisper back, "That's Meyer the Gentle, her legacy." He frowns. "Isn't she the one that kicked Brother Finton into the trough?" You say, "Gentle on the inside." You both turn back to the chant, which is now reaching its third verse, something about light and mercy and the turning of seasons. You hear the words differently tonight because you're starting to understand something. In this abbey, light isn't just about illumination, it's about memory. Each candle carries something forward. A cow, a field, a morning spent knee-deep in curds. The songs continue, echoing off the high stone vaults, wrapping around the dancing shadows. Your candle, yes, yours, burns steady, no smoke, no stutter. A flame that might actually last the whole service without vomiting into the floor. Historians still argue whether candle-making in medieval monasteries was ever considered sacred work. The records are unclear. Was it just a chore, like chamber pot scrubbing and fish gutting, or was it understood, quietly, as something more? The monks here never say, but they notice. When you get back to your cell after the service, a small slip of parchment waits on your cot. Just 2 words, written in an unsteady hand. Well burned. You don't know who left it, but your smile sticks around for hours. That night, just before sleep, you light a little test candle, a leftover from the same batch. You set it on your stone windowsill, shielded from the draft. Its glow stretches across your blanket, catching the folds like water. The scent drifts up, sweet, grassy, a little like oatcakes left in the sun. You watch it flicker, and for once, your thoughts don't drift to chores or aching arms or Brother Anne's mysterious ability to ruin candlelight with his digestive presence. Your thoughts just drift. Like the flame. Like the smoke curling toward the vaulted ceiling. Like light from a cow, now dancing its way toward the stars. It's late. Compline has ended. The chants have faded into the damp stone walls, and the other monks have shuffled off to their cells with the slow, deliberate pace of men resigned to another night of drafty slumber and scratchy wool blankets. But not you. You've been given the honor, or possibly the punishment, of checking the corridor torches. Apparently, there's been an incident. Again. The candles in the long hallway leading from the scriptorium to the dormitory have been going out too early. Not flickering out, not melting down, just out. Quietly. Mysteriously. Tonight, you're the night watch. Armed with a candle stub in one hand and a long taper in the other, you set off, barefoot, down the hallway. The corridor is long and narrow, its flagstones uneven and chilly. You count each torch as you pass, 9 on the left, 10 on the right, each set in an iron sconce, each fed from the same batch of candles you helped make 2 days ago. The cheese-fat batch. The good batch. And yet, 2 nights ago, the third candle from the library entrance just blinked out. And last night, 4 went out at once. No draft, no trickery, just darkness. You stop beside one of the offending sconces. The candle burns steadily now, as if butter wouldn't melt in its mouth, or, well, cheese fat. You kneel. Watch it. It flickers slightly. The scent is normal, mildly nutty with a grassy undercurrent, perfectly unthreatening. You sit cross-legged beside it and begin to wait. And wait. Somewhere nearby, a door creaks, a floorboard groans. You remind yourself that old wood is loud, not haunted. Still, you light another taper, just in case. You're nearly dozing off, head tilted sideways on the stone, when it happens. The flame gives a little flutter, then gone. Not blown out, not flickered out, just gone. You blink, hold your breath, relight it, and wait again. Behind you, soft footsteps approach. You turn. Brother Ian. Of course. He squats beside you, robes rustling. Is it doing it again? He whispers. You nod. Third one, same as last night. He leans in and inhales. Smells fine. Could be the batch. You both know it's not. You helped make this batch. You stirred it with your own blistered palms. You saw it burn perfectly for Vespers. Still, he shrugs. Could be ghosts? You stare at him. He grins. Or Brother Finbar's stew. And there it is. The theory none dare speak. Every night after stew duty, one particular corridor's worth of candles mysteriously snuff out. Not dramatically, not dangerously, just quietly disappointed. Ian leans closer to the sconce and sniffs again. Bit cabbagey, now that I think about it. You sigh. You think it's him? He nods, solemn. I've shared a pew with him. Candles not the only thing that goes out. You pinch the bridge of your nose. This is not what the holy texts meant by purification. You relight the candle again, and both of you step back, holding your sleeves over your noses. After a few minutes, it sputters, shivers, and goes out. Confirmed. We're dealing with gastrointestinal sabotage. You make a mental note to request a seat change in chapel. Historians still argue whether early Irish monasteries understood air quality in enclosed spaces. Some records suggest rudimentary ventilation systems, slotted shutters, open eaves, even holes carved in stone walls for wind to pass through. But none of the scrolls mention flatulence nubuste candle extinguishing, a missed opportunity. Back in the kitchen, Brother Finbar is already asleep, snoring with the ferocity of a small forge. You and Ian prepare a solution. By the light of your taper, you remove the delicate cheese fat candles from the hallway sconces and replace them with the older ones, the heavy, hardened batch you made with scraps from 3 weeks ago. Ugly, lumpy, practically bulletproof. Ian grins. Let's see him snuff these out. You nod. And let's not tell Ailby. You return to your cell well after midnight, fingers still sticky from handling the backup candles, which smell like damp hay and distant failure. But they'll burn, even if Brother Finbar decides to experiment with boiled cabbage again. You light your own stub candle before sleep. It flares, catches, glows. The scent is comforting. Cheesy, yes, but familiar. The kind of smell you now associate with prayer, peace, and the occasional mystery. As the flame dances on your wall, you smile. You've solved your first monastic candle crime. And while the scriptorium might still smell a bit strange tomorrow, At least it'll be lit. Morning greets you with an unexpected visitor. A wandering scribe, long-bearded and wide-hatted, has arrived at the abbey gates with a pack full of vellum and a cloak soaked through with last night's rain. He carries a staff carved with tiny spirals and a bundle of wax tablets tucked under his arm like a treasured loaf of bread. The monks don't rush to greet him. No one ever rushes here, but they do eventually send Brother Radan, who gestures politely and leads him inside. You follow at a safe distance, curious. Scribes are a rarity in these parts now. Most abbeys write for themselves, hoarding precious scraps of Latin like squirrels with scrolls. But this one's different. For starters, he smells faintly of lavender and old sheep. And he doesn't ask for bread or broth. He asks for cheese. 2 rounds of it, specifically. Hard, aged, with a bold rind. Brother Ailby raises an eyebrow. And candles, the scribe adds, almost as an afterthought. 6 of them, good ones. You're standing near the hearth, cleaning a soot-blackened mold. You freeze mid-scrub. Your candles. He wants your candles. The abbot emerges from his quarters, robes impeccable despite the eternal damp. He speaks quietly with the scribe for a few moments, then nods once. A trade is made. 2 wheels of cheese, aged in the back cellar since spring, are carried out. They're so hard they could double as weapons. You helped rotate them once and nearly dislocated a shoulder. And in return, poetry. The scribe will stay 3 days, copying verses into the monastery's collection. He offers to recite some aloud during supper, but the abbot gives him a look that says, only if it rhymes and doesn't delay Compline. And of course, 6 candles. From your batch. You watch as the scribe selects them. He sniffs each one like he's choosing fruit at a market. He chooses one of the golden ones, probably Mare the Gentles, and then 2 shorter stubs, plus 3 from the backup tray, the ones that smell faintly of moss and repentance. You wonder what kind of writing deserves that particular scentscape. Later that day, you find him in the scriptorium. He's set up near a narrow window, parchment unfurled, ink pot steady, your candle burning nearby in a clay holder. The scent of aged tallow and old vellum hangs in the air. You hover for a moment, pretending to inspect a shelf of hymnals. He's writing in tiny, precise letters, the sort of script that looks printed even under candlelight. His breath moves in rhythm with the quill. Dip, stroke, pause. Dip, stroke, pause. He mutters as he writes, something about oak trees and the wind, and a fox who's actually a metaphor. You like him immediately. You step closer, curious. What makes a good candle? He asks without looking up. You blink. Good? He nods toward yours. This one burns like a story. Steady. Warm. A little odd. You think for a moment. It came from Meyer, you say. The cow. He grins. Of course it did. Later, at supper, the scribe sits beside Brother Seamus and recounts tales from other abbeys, places where beeswax flows like wine, where ink is made from elderberries, and where one particularly eccentric bishop insists on singing grace in Greek. You pass him a chunk of the monastery's oat loaf. He thanks you and pulls a tiny candle stub from his satchel. For your trouble, he says, smells like rosemary and adventure. You hold it to your nose. He's not wrong. Historians still argue whether candle trading was a common practice among medieval scribes or simply a regional quirk. There are hints in old records, ledgers listing tallow alongside ink, or mentions of guest wax in monastic margins, but few first-hand accounts exist. Still, in this abbey, you've just witnessed a barter. Cheese for verse, light for language. The next morning, you find one of the scribe's poems left on your cot, written on a scrap of bark parchment, slightly crinkled and singed on one edge, possibly by your own candle. The poem is short. In stone and smoke, a light was churned, from cow and hand the wick was turned. Though humble flame and humble cheese, the monk brings night to gentle ease. You smile. You don't keep many things in your cell, but you fold the poem neatly, tuck it into the nook behind your candle stub, and relight your tiny flame. The wax melts. The scent rises, and somewhere nearby the scribe hums to himself, composing by cheese light. The sun never quite comes out today. It's more of a lighter shade of damp, a gentle drizzle that fades just enough to let the stones sweat instead of soak. You're in the dormitory now, halfway through folding your robe in a way that technically counts as obedience, when you hear it again. Psst. And then silence. The unmistakable sound of a candle snuffing itself out, or being snuffed. You pause. Slowly turn. Brother Oyan is already there, peering dramatically into the corner of the room like a monk-shaped detective in search of the sacred flame bandit. "That's the fourth night," he says in a hushed tone, as if candle extinguishing is now a capital offense. You glance toward the offending candle, still smoking, still warm. You reach down and relight it, holding your breath as the flame flickers, steadies, and burns. Nothing unusual, no draft, no ghost cow. Oyan squints. You think it's Brother Oltan? Why would he hates light, complained once that candles mess with his internal moon cycle. That was a metaphor for his sleep schedule. Was it? Oyan whispers. You decide not to engage, but you are curious. And so, after evening prayer, you set a small trap. Not a physical one, you don't have that kind of time or rope, but a candle trap. You take a slightly irregular stub from the reject pile, burns fast, smells a little like boiled socks, and place it carefully in the hallway where the snuffings have been most frequent. Then you sit and wait. For a long time, nothing happens. The flame dances. The corridor stays quiet, aside from the distant sounds of someone coughing, a goat sneezing, and the rhythmic creak of Brother Finton's knees. And then, psst, gone again. You lunge forward, only to find a figure disappearing into the side passage, hooded, suspiciously tall, moving fast for someone in a wool robe. You pursue naturally. Historians still argue whether candle sabotage was an actual form of monastic protest. Some point to scribbled margins in medieval texts suggesting frustrations about candle assignments. Brother Colin hoards the fat stubs, or lighted mine before the bell again. But nothing quite explains what you're dealing with now. You find the figure crouched behind the woodpile, holding something. You clear your throat. The figure jumps. It's not Brother Olton. It's Brother Eowyn. Of course. He holds up a cork, a snuffing cork, one of the old ones kept in the sacristy, used for safely extinguishing altar candles without blowing hot wax onto the vestments. You cross your arms. He shrugs. I was conducting an experiment. You've been snuffing the candles? Just the ugly ones. You blink. I think they're cursed. You stare. He fidgets. Okay, maybe they're just smelly. That last one made my eyes sting. You sigh, deeply. The kind of sigh that monks have perfected after years of fasting and silently judging people who sneak second helpings of oat mash. You could have just told someone. Ewan nods. I was going to, but then I thought, what if the cheese remembers? You blink again. He nods more firmly now. What if the cow knows, like deep down, that her milk was burned too fast or molded wrong? Maybe she haunts the candle. You look up at the candle in the sconce, still flickering, perfectly fine. No cows are haunting this monastery, Eowyn. A long pause. Yet, he says. You walk away. That night, the dormitory candles all stay lit. No mysterious extinguishings, no cheese-fueled phantoms, just steady flames and the usual background hum of monastic flatulence. Still, you dream oddly. Of cows with glowing eyes, of candles that moo when you light them, of Brother Eowyn whispering in a corner to a particularly lumpy tallow stub. You wake up in a sweat. The candle on your windowsill still burns gently beside you. The room smells like buttered stone and damp wool. No ghosts, just cheese. And perhaps one monk with too much imagination. It's cleanup day, or as Brother Seamus calls it, the day of eternal scraping. You wake to the sound of someone coughing up a hymn and a large copper pot being dragged across the flagstones. The hall echoes with the unmistakable scrape, thump, scrape of monks pretending not to resent every inch of the kitchen floor. You're summoned, naturally, to the wax room, or more accurately, the cheese tallow aftermath chamber. There's no glory here, just crumbs. You stand before a low table cluttered with candle stubs, misshapen, burned halfway, some with wicks curled into little waxy snails. The room smells like old milk and faint disappointment. A perfect Tuesday. Brother Ileby is already there, sleeves rolled up, inspecting a melted mess of fat and lint stuck to a mold base. He nods to a large wooden bin in the corner. The crumb bucket, Eowyn whispers, appearing at your side with the kind of timing that suggests he's been lurking behind the door for 10 minutes. The bin is, in fact, full of scrapings, bits of hardened cheese tallow chipped from sconces, windowsills, and the sides of burned-out molds. They're lumped together like the world's worst trail mix, pale yellow, grayish-white, and a mysterious green that you hope is from herbs. Your job today is simple. Melt it all down, filter it, and recast it. These are the second chance candles. You sit beside the hearth and light the fire with a stub saved from last week. It flares up quickly, maybe too quickly. You blow gently to calm it, and soon the pot is hung, the scraps dumped, and the scent begins to rise. It's not great. Imagine if fondue had joined a monastery, taken a vow of silence, and never bathed again. That's the smell. Not offensive exactly, just clingy. Brother Ileby adds a small pinch of something to the mix. Dried bog myrtle. You wrinkle your nose. Neutralizer, he mouths. You're beginning to understand why monks fast. As the mixture melts, you're given a sieve made of coarse cloth stretched over a wooden ring. You hold it over a second pot while Eowyn ladles the melted tallow through. The cloth catches the worst bits. Burned wick, crumbs of dirt, and something that might have once been moss. Why do we keep all this? you ask, voice low. Eoin shrugs. Because it still burns. That seems to be the mantra here. Still burns equals still useful. Still smells like cheese? Even better. Once strained, the fat is poured into the emergency mold tray. Cracked clay molds kept on a sloped shelf that smells like 3 centuries of mild regret. You recognize some of the rejects from previous batches. The one that smelled like wet wood. The one that wouldn't light without muttering a prayer first. And one that simply dripped itself into oblivion. And yet, here they are, getting a second chance. Historians still argue whether monastic candle practices followed strict recycling systems, or if this sort of wax reuse was a regional habit. Some accounts suggest wax was more sacred in wealthier abbeys, used once, then discarded with solemnity. But in places like this, everything circles back. You sit back as the molds cool. Eon holds up one of the stubs you filtered and sniffs it. Still smells a bit like soup. He lights it. The flame wobbles, then steadies. You both watch it quietly. It's not the brightest or the cleanest, but it burns. Aelb walks over, picks it up, examines the base, then places it on a windowsill. Privy candle, he signs. You laugh, not because it's funny, though it is, because the privy needs light too, maybe especially. Later that day, you help scrape hardened drips from the chapel's floor. A tiny chisel, a bucket, knees on cold stone, candle wax fused with time. You find a glob with what looks like a strand of hay inside. You chip it loose and drop it into the crumb bucket, where it lands with a soft plop. Eon, beside you, sighs. One day I'll make a candle so pure it never melts sideways. You look at his last stub, burned at a slant, curled into a waxy frown. One day, you say. He nods, already imagining it. You finish the day with sore arms, wax-sticky hands, and the faint scent of ancient cheese clinging to your robe like an old proverb. But the molds are full, the scraps are gone, and the crumb bucket is, for now, empty. A small triumph, because even the leftovers can light the dark. You knew today would be different when you woke up to the sound of no bells, no nun, no sext, not even the grumbling clang that usually means Brother Finbar dropped the handbell in the goose trough again. Just quiet, suspiciously gentle quiet. Outside your cell, the hallway is already glowing, not from candles, but from the pale golden sunlight of midwinter breaking through the cloud cover for the first time in weeks. The air even smells different. Less of old wax and damp wool, more of earth and frost and something that might be anticipation. Then it hits you. It's solstice. The monks don't talk much about it, but you've seen the preparations, the clearing of the side chapel, the polishing of sconces usually left to rust, the special candles, longer, thinner, wrapped in oilskin and labeled with faint Latin script brought up from the cool cellar. Tonight is the vigil. the longest night of the year, when the candles are kept burning from dusk until dawn, not in silence, but in slow, rotating prayer. The abbey becomes a place of uninterrupted light and, if you're lucky, slightly less interrupted sleep. You're lucky this year. You've been chosen to help set the candles. You gather with a small group of monks near the old cloister, where the walls are carved with vines and stars and, if you squint, a sheep who looks like he's holding a lantern. Brother Samus insists it's symbolic. Brother Aeon says it's just terrible carving. You each carry a basket of unlit candles, and you head toward the solstice chapel. This space is rarely used. The walls curve slightly inward, like the whole room is bowing toward the altar. The ceiling is lower, cozier. The floor is made of slate that hums under your bare feet. And along the wall are 60 candle holders, 20 on each side, 10 near the altar. This is your canvas. Each candle is set carefully into place. Most are standard size, cheese fat like always, but a few are special, beeswax, reserved for the high altar, burnished to a soft golden hue. You unwrap one and hold it to your nose. It smells like sunlight and honey and something you can't quite name. Maybe memory. You glance at Brother Ailby, who nods as if to say, "Yes, even we light the fancy ones sometimes." By late afternoon, the room is ready. 60 candles, all aligned, all trimmed, all waiting. At dusk, the lighting begins. One by one, flames are passed. No ceremony, no chant, just breath and spark and glow. You hold your candle to the next wick, watching as the fire kisses it gently, then moves on. The room brightens slowly, not with harshness, but with a thickening of the air. Golden haze, soft shadows, light pooling in corners like warm milk. You take your place by the door. Your shift is from dusk until the middle watch. After that, Brother Alton takes over, assuming he doesn't oversleep again and set his robe on fire like last year. The candles burn quietly. There's a different quality to them tonight. The cheese-fat ones, yes, but also the beeswax, and even a few layered blends, fat and wax, churned together by candle monks, hoping for both longevity and dignity. You breathe deeply. The scent is layered, earthy, buttery, slightly sweet. If light had a kitchen, this would be its aroma. Ian sits beside you, cross-legged, muttering verses from a psalter. He's not on duty, but no one asked him to leave. "This is the good batch," he says softly. You nod, and they're holding well. No drips yet. You glance around. It's true. Even the crumblier ones are burning clean. Maybe they know, he adds, with the tone of someone about to make it weird. Know what? That it's the longest night, that they've got to last. You snort. They're candles, not heroes. He raises an eyebrow. Same thing in here. And oddly, you agree. Because these flames aren't just about seeing. They're about presence, about staying awake in the dark, not in fear, but in faith that dawn will come. Historians still argue whether candlelit vigils during the winter solstice were a borrowed tradition from older pagan rites, or a purely Christian invention meant to symbolize the light of Christ. The monks here don't argue. They just light and wait. You rise after your shift, legs stiff, candle stub in hand. You pass the flame to Brother Olton, who is, miraculously, awake. He takes it with a grunt and nods at the beeswax candle nearest to the altar. "That one's singing," he says. You pause. Listen. Nothing, of course, but maybe a low hum? You smile. Perhaps that's what cheese-fat dreams sound like. You return to your cell as the rest of the abbey sleeps and wakes in turns, each monk keeping the light alive just a little longer. And as you pull your blanket up to your chin and place your candle stub on the windowsill, still glowing gently, you feel it again, the warmth of something ordinary made sacred. The longest night is halfway over. And thanks to 60 cows, 8 monks, 1 scribe, and a crumb bucket's worth of recycled hope, it will be bright. You wake before dawn, not because of the bell, which hasn't rung yet, but because of a glow. Not the sunrise. Not yet. It's the chapel. From your narrow window, you can see it. Soft amber light spilling across the courtyard stones, flickering faintly in the cold morning air. A living hush has settled over the monastery, and for the first time in weeks, the wind is still. You throw on your robe and hurry outside, bare feet careful on the slick, moss-streaked stones. Inside the chapel, the candles are still burning. Not all of them. Some are stubs now, puddled into little waxy relics, but enough. Enough to keep the glow alive. Enough to say, "We stayed." You sit near the back and watch as the last hour of night passes slowly, gently, like someone pulling a heavy wool blanket off the world. Brother Ileby is already there, silently trimming one of the final wicks. He nods as you enter, his expression unreadable, but maybe a little proud. Or maybe he's just sleep-deprived. The beeswax candle at the altar has burned low, a golden dome now sunken into itself, its wick listing slightly to one side like a weary pilgrim. But it's still burning. You shift your gaze to the cheese-fat candles, the ones you helped make, stir, pour, and trim. They're faring better than you expected. The batch from Meyer the Gentle has burned the longest, stubborn and slow, a flame that simply refuses to give up. You feel a strange swell of affection, gratitude even. You promise yourself you'll feed her an extra fistful of turnips later. Brother Aeon shuffles in, wrapped in his robe like a sentient curtain. He sits beside you, eyes puffy with sleep. "I dreamed of fire," he mumbles. "Were you in it?" "No, I was the candle, and I smelled amazing." You chuckle softly. "You do smell a bit like beeswax." He beams. "Thank you." You sit in the warm silence of the chapel, watching as the last hour of night passes slowly, gently, like someone pulling a heavy wool blanket off the world. The bell rings, not the small clack of a handbell, but the full bronze voice of morning echoing through the abbey with deep, round sound. It's dawn. The vigil is over. One by one, the monks enter, some blinking in the light, others with hands folded, ready to sing the lauds. The candles are not extinguished at once. That would be rude, somehow. No, they're allowed to burn just a little longer, until they extinguish themselves or melt into sleep. You're assigned to the extinguishing detail, Not a glamorous task, but a gentle one. Armed with a wooden snuffer, carved in the shape of a fish. Someone's idea of symbolism. You move from candle to candle, easing each flame into rest. It feels like tucking in a child. Even the beeswax candle is reluctant to go. Its flame stutters twice, flares once more, and then folds in, leaving behind the soft wisp of honey and ash. You turn to the last cheese-fat candle. It's tiny now, barely a stub. You hesitate. Its wick is curled, its wax nearly gone, but it's still burning. A little sideways, yes, a little crooked, but burning. Like all the best ones. You don't snuff it. You let it burn itself out. After breakfast, barley again, plus something vaguely resembling dried apple. You return to the candle room. The molds are empty, the fat bucket cleaned, the hearth quiet. For now. But the work will begin again soon. More milk, more cream, more fat, more stubs, more stories. Historians still argue whether Irish monks knew how meaningful their candles were, whether they thought of their lights as theology or just a daily necessity. But here, among these walls and stones and waxy drips, it's clear to you now. They didn't just make candles. They made time. They shaped darkness. They kept watch. You head back to your cell, past the cloister walk and the goat that may or may not be judging you, and sit by your windowsill one more time. There, in a little clay dish, sits a leftover stub, not the prettiest, a bit lopsided, smells faintly of thyme, oat mash, and hard work. You light it, and as the flame rises one last time today, you breathe in the warmth of it all. You've done your part. The cheese fat has done its part, and the light, for now, is enough. The last of the candlelight dances across your stone cell. The air is still, and the warmth from the stub on your windowsill seems to settle deep into your bones. Not hot, not harsh, but comforting. Familiar. Like the smell of warm bread in a cold kitchen, or the hush just after a bell stops ringing. Outside, the wind picks up again, but it's gentler now, less a howl and more a lullaby. It whispers through the chapel rafters, curls past the dormitory windows, and hums against the slate tiles like a story too tired to finish its last sentence. The flickering of the stub slows. You watch it lean slightly to one side, as if it too is ready to sleep. The last bit of cheese tallow, barely enough to spread on toast, gives its final gift. A faint glow, a soft scent, a promise that even small things can burn long enough to be noticed. You lie back, the wool blanket rough against your cheek, but warm. You feel the heaviness settle, the good kind, the kind that says the day is done, the watch was kept, the flame stayed alive. And just before your eyes close, you see it. The candle dies, not in a puff or a sizzle, but with the quiet sigh of something complete. The dark returns, slow and smooth and full of rest, and in that darkness, somewhere deep in your chest, the light remains. Sleep well, friend. Sweet dreams.